Lisa, and this is episode 10, Policies that Protect You Without Sounding Cold or Rigid. So most therapists write their policies in one of two ways. Either they copy someone else's policies and hope that they cover everything, or they avoid writing them altogether because every time they sit down to do it, it feels like they're preparing for a fight. Here's what I want to reframe for you. Your policies are not a legal document designed to protect you from your client. They are a clinical document designed to protect the therapeutic relationship. So when you understand that, writing them gets a lot easier, and enforcing them stops feeling like a confrontation and starts feeling like good clinical care. So why policies feel so hard to write? The reason that policies feel uncomfortable to most new therapists comes down to a training problem. Graduate school hopefully taught you to be warm, responsible, responsive, flexible, and attuned to your client needs. But policies feel like the exact opposite of all of those things. So they feel like you're putting up walls before you even know who you're working with. They feel transactional, and they feel like you're already imagining the worst. Here's what it actually is. The therapists who struggle most with enforcing their policies are the ones who never got clear on what their policies were in the first place. Policies are not about distrust, they're about structure. And structure is one of the most therapeutic things that you can offer a client. A practice with clear, consistent policies creates a container. It communicates that this is a professional relationship with defined terms, that you take your work seriously, and that the rules apply to everyone, not just the difficult clients and not just the ones that you're worried about. Everyone. That consistency is actually part of what makes the work feel safe for clients. They know what to expect. They know what happens if they cancel last minute, and they know how to reach you and when, and they know what you will and won't do. And that clarity is therapeutic, not cold. So the policies you actually need. Let me walk you through the core policies every private practice needs or should have, not a comprehensive legal review. So you don't need to get an attorney to look at your documents before. But the categories you need to have covered are cancellation and no-show policy. This is the one that most therapists are anxious about, and also the most important to have clear from the very start. So you need to know, how much notice do you require for a cancellation? What do you charge for a late cancel or a no-show? Is there ever an exception? A reasonable structure is 24 to 48 hours notice, and full session fee charged for late cancels and no-shows, with one waived exception per year or per relationship. The specific terms matter less than having terms and communicating them clearly at the start of the relationship. So payment and billing policy. When do you collect payment? What forms of payment do you accept? What happens when a card declines? What is your process for outstanding balances? How do you handle clients who are using insurance versus paying out of pocket? These questions need answers before you actually see your client, not in the moment a card gets declined. Communication policy. How do clients reach you between sessions? What is your response time? What do you do if someone reaches out in crisis outside of session hours? What platforms do you use and why? This policy protects both you and your clients. It sets realistic expectations about your availability, which prevents the resentment that builds when clients expect things you never agreed to. So, telehealth policy. If you offer telehealth, what are your expectations around the environment, technology, and location? What happens if the connection drops, or what states can you see clients in? This last one matters more than most. So, practicing across state lines without the appropriate licensure is a licensing board complaint waiting to happen. So, social media and contact outside of session. What's that policy? Do you connect with clients on social media? What do you do if a client contacts you on a personal platform? What is your approach to being tagged, reviewed, or mentioned publicly? Having a clear position on this before it happens is much better than trying to figure it out in the moment. And your records and confidentiality policy. Clients need to understand what you document, how long you keep your records, who can access them, and under what circumstances you are required to break confidentiality. This is not just good clinical practice, it's a legal requirement under HIPAA. So, how to present policies without sounding cold. The content of your policies matters. The delivery matters. Most therapists make one of two mistakes when presenting their policies. Either they hand clients a document and hope they read it, or they read through the whole thing out loud in the first session, like reciting terms and conditions. Neither of those works. Here is what does work. So, present policies as part of informed consent, not as a warning. The language matters. There's a significant difference between I charge a sole session fee for late cancellation, and part of how I protect our work together is by holding your appointment time consistently. My cancellation policy is 24 hours notice, and here is what happens if something comes up last minute. Same policy, completely different frame. Name the clinical reason behind each policy. When you explain why a policy exists, clients receive it differently. Your cancellation policy exists because your time is finite and someone else could have had that slot. And your communication policy exists because the therapeutic relationship has a container, and unlimited access outside of session changes the nature of the work. Your payment policy exists because financial clarity in the relationship prevents resentment from building on both sides. So do it at intake, not at the first sign of a problem. Policies introduced reactively after a client has already missed a session or sent an after hours text always feel punitive. Policies introduced at the beginning of the relationship feel like part of how you work. The timing is everything. Put it in writing and get a signature, not because you are building a legal case against your client, because the written document protects both of you. When policies are verbal only, memories differ. When they are in writing and signed, there is shared reference point that removes the he said, she said dynamic entirely. So enforcing policies without losing the relationship. Having good policies is only useful if you actually enforce them. And this is where most therapists fall apart. Not because they don't have policies, but because they can't bring themselves to apply them consistently. And here is what enforcement actually looks like when it's done well. It is calm. It does not sound like a confrontation because it isn't a confrontation. It sounds like a reminder of something you both already agreed to. If I wanted to follow up on yesterday's cancellation, as we talked about at the start of our work together, my policy is a full session fee for cancellation with less than 24 hours notice. I'll go ahead and process that today. It is consistent. The therapist who waives the fee for one client and enforces it for another creates resentment and confusion. So consistency communicates fairness. It also communicates that the policy is a policy, not a preference. You apply selectively. It is not personal. A client who misses a session is not a bad person. A client who needs to be reminded of a boundary is not a difficult client. These are ordinary parts of practice. Practice management, and the therapist who treats them as such handles them much more smoothly than the therapist who treats every policy conversation as a therapeutic rupture that needs to be fixed or carefully managed. It is sometimes clinically rich when a client consistently pushes against a boundary. That is information. What does it mean that this person cannot tolerate being told no? What does it mean that they consistently test whether or not you're going to hold the structure that you said you would? Those questions belong in the clinical work, not in the administrative relationship. But you can only access that clinical material if you are actually enforcing the policy consistently enough for the pattern to become visible. So your policies are not bureaucratic filler. They are the structure that makes the therapeutic relationship possible. So when they are clear, when they are communicated well, and when you enforce them consistently, they do not create distance between you and your client. They actually create safety. They communicate professionalism and they protect you from the specific kind of burnout that comes from a practice where the rules were never clear and everyone, including you, has been improvising. So if you want help building out the systems and documentation that support a sustainable practice, policies, intake forms, session notes, the whole operational layer. That is exactly what Systems That Simplify course covers. So the link is in the description. And if you're still earlier in the process and building your foundation from scratch, Launch Lab, the first 90 days in private practice, including setting up your policies correctly before you see your first client, also in the description. So next week, we are talking about your intake flow from the first call to the first session and how to build a process that is both efficient and genuinely therapeutic. Subscribe so that you don't miss it.